Welcome to this meeting of Dumfries and Galloway Council, and welcome to members of the public in attendance. During the 5 weeks since our council last met, this country has witnessed some shocking events: 3 horrific terrorist incidents in Manchester and London, and the appalling fire in the Grenfell Flats, which increasingly appears to have resulted to what could be described as corporate criminality. We have also witnessed an extraordinary general election, which I think took us all by surprise, whatever our party. And on behalf of the Council, I offer congratulations to David Mundell MP on his re-election, to Alistair Jack MP on his election, and thanks to outgoing MP Richard Arkless for Dumfries and Galloway for his work on behalf of our region. We have a range of items to consider this morning, and I intend that we progress this effectively and efficiently today. With that aim in mind, I respectfully ask all members to be courteous to each other, to speak through the chair, and not to butt in or cut across other members. If any member does not follow this procedure, I shall reprimand him or her, and multiple offenders will be asked to leave the chamber. Members of the public, of course, are welcome to attend this meeting, but they cannot take part in the proceedings. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and that the recording will subsequently be available for public listening. And I would also request everybody who has mobile phones to switch those onto airplane mode, as they can interfere with the system, the public address system. Rona, can you provide the Sederunt and any apologies?
Thank you, Leader. We have apologies from Councillors Blake and Karen Carruthers. And as we start the meeting, Councillors McGregor, Scobie and Wood are not present.
Thank you, Rona. Do any members have a declaration of interest that they wish to make? Councillor Maitland.
I do, Leader. I noticed that there's mention has been made of the kite power project near Stranraer on page 101 of members' papers. I have an interest in Kelwood Engineering, which is manufacturing some component parts of kite power. I do not think, however, that requires me to leave the room at the time.
Thank you for that declaration, Councillor Maitland. Okay. Are members content to approve the minutes of 23rd of May? And I will move the minutes.
Happy to second those, Leader.
Members are agreed? Okay. Item 4 on the agenda updates members on progress following the Phase 1 consultation of the review of the scheme for establishment of community councils, as agreed by full council at its meeting held on the 20th of September 2016. The report seeks approval to amend the scheme and its schedules following Phase 1 and prior to Phase 2 of the engagement process, in accordance with the agreed timetable. Can I therefore open the debate up to consider our requirements? Any members wishing to speak on this issue? Derek Crichton and his team are here to assist in the event of any queries or questions relating to the report. Okay, so we now move to the recommendations in the paper. If there are no questions or comments, members are asked to note 1 and 2 and to agree 3 and 4. Are members agreed to do so? Grand. Okay. Item 5 presents the Council's unaudited annual accounts and the Pension Fund's unaudited annual report and accounts for the financial year ending 31st of March 2017. These are required by regulation to be submitted no later than 30th of June following the financial year end. Members will have been provided with a set of these accounts and should note that they will now be subject to external audit, and the outcomes of this will be considered at Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee in due course. Paul Garrett is here to answer any questions on the report, and I open the meeting up to member debate. Oh, right, Paul's not here. It's Karen, is it? Karen McNeill. Have we any questions on the unaudited accounts and reports? These went in part to Policy and Resources the other week too. Okay. We now move to recommendations, and members are asked to note this item. Members agree to do so. Good progress so far. Maybe not, maybe not for much longer, but Item 6 presents the progress made in delivering the Council's priorities and commitments over the final year of the last Council, and the report on this is contained in Appendix 1. I welcome the clear progress that has been achieved in the last year to progress these priorities. I recognise that the strong commitment and contribution of all our staff is vital in achieving this, and I want to thank all of them on the Council's behalf for the effort they make each and every day, despite the challenging times we all face. It is the staff of this Council who make a really positive difference for local people. Following the elections and the formation of an administration, a partnership agreement was signed by both parties, and this indicates how the administration intends to deliver the existing priorities of the Council and the commitments underpinning these priorities. This is presented in Appendix 2. The intention is now to incorporate these commitments into an overall Council plan, which is underpinned by Directorate business plans to deliver our Council priorities for 2017 to 2022. Councillor Davidson and I will each make a brief statement on the partnership agreement prior to its discussion by Council. As I indicated, the partnership agreement is organised under the same priorities and commitments as previously agreed by Council and presented in the performance report for the last year. This is a clear signal that this Council intends to build on the achievements of the last session. It signifies stability in the direction this Council is taking, and it recognises that these priorities are long-term and that their delivery is a process of continuous improvement. I realise, of course, that some members do not approve of the partnership between our two groups and that there will be disagreement over some of the content of this document. However, I do hope that even those members who don't care for the political complexions of the administration will find much in this document with which they can agree, and that we will go forward as one Council of 43 members in the delivery of the actions supporting these priorities and commitments. The document recognises the challenges the region faces, improving the skills and employability of some of our residents, improving the infrastructure of a large region with a relatively small population, enhancing and improving our towns and villages, tackling poverty, which in many of our rural areas is hidden, improving educational attainment overall, while at the same time closing the attainment gap, supporting an ageing population and attracting younger people to stay or to move here to take up employment. The document also reflects the strengths of our regions and how these underpin and contribute to achieving the Council's priorities. Our landscape and tourism offer, our food and drink industries, our land-based industries, our strength in arts and culture, the region's growing reputation as a venue for major arts and festivals, energy production and storage, and of course, the strong sense of community which characterises our settlements, large and small. The partnership programme is ambitious. 47 proposals to build the local economy, 25 to provide the best start for our children, 17 to combat poverty and protect our most vulnerable people and communities, 18 to make Dumfries and Galloway a more inclusive council. The programme is progressive and it is also positive. We want to change Dumfries and Galloway for the better, in the interests of all its communities and all its residents. I know that the administration does not have a monopoly on that ambition, and I hope that we will all be able to work together to realise it and to make those changes. Councillor Davidson, you also wish to say a few words.
Thank you, Leader. Our joint statement of priorities and commitments reflects the overwhelming majority of our manifesto pledges from the local government election campaign, which, in no small part due to the events that you outlined in your introduction, now seems to be a very long time ago indeed. During the post-election discussions, it became readily apparent that there are many areas of agreement between our respective parties, and those resulted in the document we have placed before full council, which we believe, as you say, is progressive, ambitious and comprehensive. In many respects, local government presents the opportunity for different political parties with different views to make common cause on important local issues, and I hope, therefore, that there will be large portions of our priorities and commitments with which all members will be able to agree. The proposals reflect the established priorities for the Council, which during the course of the past 5 years, most, if not all, political groups have had a hand in developing. But we seek to build on these with, for example, a renewed focus on economic development, playing to our strengths and growing what we already do well. In that context, I should say that I warmly welcome the Scottish Government's announcement of the creation of a South of Scotland enterprise agency using the Highlands and Islands enterprise model, which I am certain will be of significant benefit to the long-term economic prospects of the region. We look to improve our town centres in Dumfries and beyond, and we seek to nurture new tourist opportunities to attract more people to our region. We also look for a relentless focus on educational attainment, including building ASL capacity, restoring free instrumental instruction, and a review of charging policy, which will prioritise reviewing charges for adults with disabilities, as well as a radical reappraisal of the region's public transport provision. It is not so much the respective political complexions of this administration, which you referred to, Leader, which led to our partnership, as much as the alignment of two sets of policy priorities, which so evidently, self-evidently, lent themselves to the approach that we have adopted and which we place before you. We welcome, as an administration, I think, robust debate and forthright disagreement, but in presenting these priorities and commitments, we also hope that many of them will gain broad support across this chamber too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. I now call Councillor Hislop, followed by Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Leader. I think the first part of the report, which shows what we've done over the last few years, reflects quite well on the fact that we have a diminishing budget. One of the ones I was just wanting a bit of clarity on was the Dumfries and Galloway average gross weekly pay linked to national indicator. Now, my understanding we'd actually changed that, and it was actually similar to the one that's in the new document, which is that we would try and reduce the gap between our average and the Scottish average by, was it 20%? Now, I thought that's what was the target rather than the current one, and have we moved towards that? Do you want me to go on to my other points, or would you like me to answer?
I'll invite the Chief Executive to answer your first point.
I think Councillor Hislop is quite right that within our regional economic strategy, we have 3 targets, and one of the targets is to reduce that to the 20%. This is the target that members agreed in relation to this plan, but the other plan is actually the long-term target that we're running to. The information available to that, which should be available from the National Office of Statistics in July, and I'll update members as soon as we have those figures through EEI committee.
Thank you. Is that satisfied? Do you wish to expand your other point?
Right. We'll move on to the sort of second part, which is the progressive partnership. A lot of what's in here, I think our group would find favour with. There are some points, as you said yourself, that political groups will find difficulty in accepting. There are some in here I would have liked to have seen firmer commitments. One in my own ward was the phase 2 of the Dumfries Learning Town. Rather than to have just a plan, I would have liked to have thought that we would have been starting to develop that in the next 5 years and actually on the ground. The pupils at Dumfries High School and Dumfries Academy, I think they also would like to see something like that. But words can be changed, and I suppose we can do that. One of my big concerns is we have a large document here with a lot of projects on it. Now, if we go back to last Friday's meeting, one of the things for the Review of Standing Orders subcommittee was a councillor's role and his duty. One of those things was to have the fullest of facts in front of them before they make a decision. Now, I looked through these and I know, typical Tory, cost rather than value, but we don't have what some of these projects will cost us. And going forward, if we're looking at a cost against something, it might actually be that we value something else more than what we're actually putting in the project. And we may have to stop that other service because we have reducing budgets, we don't have costs against this. So how can we, as a council, actually agree to putting this into our plan just now, rather than possibly looking at bringing back a draft plan in September, which actually has the fuller detail so that we can actually make an informed decision? Because we could be looking at, I don't know, 40, 50 million pounds worth of commitments in here. We could also be looking at 30, 40 million pounds worth of reduction in funding from Scottish Government if we don't get uplifts like what we used to get, which means 80 million pounds worth of a gap to find. I think Highland Council and various other councils have been looking at funding gaps So how can we take a decision to actually agree that this goes into a plan before we actually know what the cost is?
I think, Councillor Heslop, what will happen is that this will actually be translated into the Directorate Business Plans, and they'll come back to the relevant committees and to the Council for agreement. Now, I can certainly speak on behalf of the Labour Group. The commitments that we had in our manifesto were contained in our budget for next year. So we actually had already budgeted for our commitments. I think the same is probably true for the SNP commitments also.
Simply taking up that point, I look at paragraph 3.8, and I'm not sure that Councillor Hislop and us are actually a million miles apart on what is planned to come back, if you see what I mean. Or perhaps he could explain what he believes that would be deficient in.
Chair, I would rather see that we have a draft plan that comes back which is fully impact assessed and with clear financial implications, so that we know if we need to make additional savings to actually allow us to do the projects that are in your plan, rather than have a plan that comes back on the day. I'd rather see a draft plan so that we can either agree it at the September meeting or not, rather than have them. Maybe it's my reading of the wording, which was give authority for the detailed commitments in the administration's plan to be incorporated into the overall plans. I'd rather see it come back to us before it goes, because as it is, I don't think I could agree that this is the plan going forward. But if it's a case that we're bringing back a plan in September, then to agree it then, that's when I would rather agree or oppose it at that point.
Okay. I wonder if Chief Executive, you had another point about the Learning Town. Maybe you can clarify the issue about the progress with the Learning Town.
Thank you, Leader. I think that to clarify, it's always an intention to complete Learning Town. That was the members' decision over the period. Now, obviously, the major funder of that is the Scottish Government, and it would be dependent upon the next phases of the schools programme. We believe that a next phase will be announced in September. In early indications in contact with the government, they've been down assessing those councils that are ready to go with the money, and we've received a very positive, because our Learning Town is on time and on budget. So therefore, and actually is delivering real innovation has been the feedback. So we have already not sat in the laurels, we already prepared in back of members' decisions scopes for the completion of the Learning Town. So through Education Committee, we'll be receiving reports in relation to where we are in the Learning Town. But certainly we are ready to make a bid subject to member approval if the fund opens in September, as we believe it is. Whether or not that would enable the full completion of the Learning Town would depend upon the fund that's available, but certainly we'd be in a position to bid for at least one, if not both, of the completion of both elements at that point. So we will obviously keep members informed. At the moment there's been no announcement, but it's my strong belief that there will be a fund available, another schools fund available in the autumn, and we will be certainly in a position to bid, as has been the members' previous decision.
I think, Chief Executive, could you also maybe confirm what the process is in terms of the council plan and directed business plans, and what is the role of member involvement and agreement for those plans?
Certainly. I think it's probably a nuance in words here. Obviously, any plan that I would bring forward for members' consideration is subject to members' agreement. So whether or not you call it a draft or you call it a plan, it would be subject to members to agree. I think that what we've lacked in the past, because of the way that we have been funded, has been that long-term plan. It would be my intention to bring a plan that takes the priorities and commitments over the 5-year period of this council, setting out both the challenges but also some of the significant workforce transition that we'd have to do. An area obvious for members is the early learning agenda, where we have to develop a workforce across the region that currently doesn't exist. At the same time, potentially reducing the workforce in the council, and they're not equivalent jobs. So there's a whole raft of strategic issues. So it would be my intention that in September we would set out that fully costed plan over the 5-year period with our best assumptions on the funding progress and the workforce transition. The Directorate Business Plans is obviously where the devil is in the detail. That's where members will be agreeing the how and the measures. But certainly, the plan I would bring forward for members' consideration would be for members to agree and adjust before it would then move forward to be implemented.
Right, I hope that satisfies your concerns, that you will have another opportunity to examine this in greater detail and to examine the costings. Thanks, Councillor Hislop. I've got Councillor Bell, Councillor Maitland, Councillor Carruthers and Councillor Charters wishing to speak. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Leader. It's on page 99, and we've been talking about priorities for the Council and Administration and build the local economy. As you know, I'm a farmer, have been farming for a number of years, and it says in here, explore innovative ways we can support our land-based industries, in particular agriculture and forestry. Well, one thing this Council needs to do to take a lead here is we've had delayed farm payments is affecting people across the region here, across people in Scotland. It's affecting the rural economy. If this administration, this council is keen to get behind the rural economy, we need to be writing a letter to the Scottish Government Minister to say we need to get this issue resolved. As I remember, when you were MSP for Dumfriesshire, Leader, you stood up for the farming community and raised this several times. So hopefully we can get a letter from Dumfries and Galloway Council. We need to get these payments made across the region. It's affecting the rural economy. I'm sure you'll be keen to help us on this one.
I'm sure the entire council would be in agreement with that. I know that there have been long-term problems with the IT associated with those payments. As you know, that we have MSPs from this area have raised that on occasions in Parliament, and I'm sure they'll continue to do so. Certainly, if there would be any assistance in writing to the Cabinet Secretary to ask for progress and to urge that progress is made promptly, I'm sure there would be no problem about doing so. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Leader, absolutely. But I would also say that we are seeking a meeting with Mr Ewing, particularly as regards potential investment in forestry and the forest industry. We can no doubt use that opportunity at the same point to reinforce that message.
Councillor Maitland.
Thank you. I had great sympathy, actually, with Councillor Hislop's comments about considering the plan as a whole. I would be alarmed if we were going to incorporate these proposals as they stand straight into business plans, which would go into committees, without having the opportunity to consider prioritising, I suppose, as a whole. And so I have a great deal of sympathy with Councillor Hislop's suggestion that we don't agree this at this point, but we do take the opportunity over the summer recess to consult with each other. Because as you say, Leader, I mean, the idea is that we want to go forward as one council. I totally agree with that. And the Deputy Leader talked about making common cause, and I absolutely agree with that. I stood on the basis of attempting to create consensus. And it seems to me that much of what is in your proposal can be agreed. I have no difficulty with that. But there are some things which we can't. And it would be much nicer, I would suggest to you, if we could come to some arrangement to speak to each other during the summer recess and attempt to get consensus. Because we're going to have great problems over the next few years. Everybody suggests that times are tight. I will say ourselves that our enterprising D&G has not performed the way it should have. We've got problems there. And who knows what's going to come up in the next few months, few years in terms of financial problems. We don't know that. So at this stage, I would suggest that when you come to recommendations, I would simply ask that we might agree that a draft council plan is presented at the full council meeting on the 26th of September, following consultations over the summer recess between groups.
Councillor Maitland, I hope that you had some reassurance from what the Chief Executive said, that in fact the council plan will come back to the next full meeting of council. Personally, I am very happy to make a commitment to consultation with the groups over the summer period prior to that coming back. What we're actually being asked to do today is to agree that to enable the council to be able to, our officers to be able to work up that plan for our consideration in September. Councillor Marshall.
Just a point of clarification, if we are going to agree to that, what would be helpful is if the independent group and the Conservative group could actually give us their manifestos that they stood on in the elections, because ours are based on the manifestos that we put forward to the people. So it'd be interesting to see what their manifestos look like.
I think that the point is taken, Councillor Marshall, but I think actually what we're attempting to do is to work up our council plan based on the administration's manifesto commitments and put those forward for discussion. And now I appreciate that the opposition groups may not agree with every part of that, but we need to start the process of developing the council plan for the next, and that's actually what we're asking you today, to start that process. And there will be further opportunity to debate that when we come back after recess. So my list is Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Leader. Thanks for getting the chance to say a few words in regards to this as well. I think, with the greatest of respect, before I say, there's a couple of things that I'll just looking back at my notes, and this is meant with the greatest respect, Leader, because to both you yourself, the Deputy Leader, and the fact the administration, but the points that I picked up on firstly was that your appendix, the progressive partnership, it's not ambitious enough, it's lacklustre, it supports the white sand, that's another agenda item, but certainly going back to manifesto promises. The impact assessment, there's none there, and it kind of alludes to what Councillor Hislop's been saying. It's the financial impact assessment, the wider context of that. But I'll take the opportunity to take my full 3 minutes. I'll just pick up on the economy side of things and some of the notes that I took. On page 99, it says on your third bullet point down, I think it is, introduce discretionary rates in lieu for social or community enterprises serving food and drink. So, I mean, and I suppose you should outline, I along with the other speakers that have spoken, I mean, there's a lot in here that we do actually agree with. There absolutely is. But who would go against that? If you're trying to encourage social enterprise, so on and so forth. But when you go down to the second last bullet point, second last box, and it says provide support for businesses to increase the number of new startups and grow existing businesses, including, you got the second bullet point, and there it says review our approach to business rates, for example, using rate levies to discourage empty town centre properties. Well, it's having the detail of that. What does that mean? Does that mean we've got to tax the private sector and give reductions in tax to the social or the third and independent sectors? It's trying to understand, what does that mean? Working with local communities to deliver the fair trade zone status of a region. What is the economic impact in that? Why is that there? It's having this greater level of understanding to our region. What's the economic advantages? Again, in real terms, we've got to think, well, of course we'd support fair trade, but what is the detail behind it? Looking at your major event strategy, there's a few bullet points in there, but the obvious ones that are missing is like trying to get the British Pipe Band Championship back down here. The Tour of Britain, there's a void there. That we get worldwide recognition when it comes to Dumfries and Galloway. So simple things like that. I've got a load of things. Increasing investment in our roads infrastructure, I think that's pretty much a no-brainer. But what's the detail? How do we actually go about that? Good to understand. I know you've referred to your business plans, and so on page 100, and it's the 1, 2, 3, the third box down there. Brexit came to mind when I read that. We're moving out of Europe, so I mean Brexit did actually come to mind. I thought, oh, what's the impact? What does that mean? We'll be out of Europe in 2 years' time, but there you go. We're talking about NUTS 2 and the European structural funds. And again, further down, the 1, 2, 3, fourth up from the top, which I've already referred to, implement the projects within the flood risk management plan, including developing flood prevention schemes for Newton Stewart, Langham, and the White Sands. Again, so the White Sands, that's a different agenda item. I could go on. I've got quite a few different notes, but I'm just trying to make the point, and I'm probably getting close to my 3 minutes now, Leader. That there's so much detail missing from here. It's difficult to be able to just agree this as it gets into our business plans, then we look at redeveloping that or changing it. I know the Chief Executives give us some reassurances in regards to that. Absolutely content with the motion that Councillor Maitland's put forward. I think it's right and correct. If we're going to move forward as one council, then we should be looking at that. We should be actually thinking, okay, what does this mean? Let's have the fullest of information as a council and members of the council to consider this as we go forward. So, I mean, that's my initial thoughts. I've got a lot more scribbles and questions and such like written down if need be, but you've got my sense of direction, Leader, and thanks for the time.
If I can just deal with one or two of your points. First of all, it is a discretionary rates relief for social community enterprises. It's actually, the important point there is it's discretionary in order to encourage certain businesses in certain locations. It's not a mandatory one. I think in terms of, I'm surprised that you don't want to rate levies to discourage empty town centre properties. That is one of the greatest problems faced by our towns and villages, our investment companies which have empty properties. And that is one of the things one of the weapons we have that we can use in order to discourage companies or others for not using the properties they've got. We want to actually bring businesses, social enterprises, people back into our town centres. And that's what's behind that one. In terms of the Nuts 2 area, yes, we know that Brexit has happened. I wonder whose fault that was, but we do know that Brexit has happened. The point is that there will be subsequent schemes of regional assistance. We are told through the UK government and through the Scottish government, and that we want to ensure that the Nuts 2 area remains the basis of attracting funding into this area, because it actually has been very successful in bringing funding in. So we want to say to the UK government, to the Scottish government, once Britain leaves the EU, we want the regional assistance to be arranged on that basis, because it is to the advantage of Dumfries and Galloway. I know, of course, as you say, the flood risk management plan, it's quite obvious that some you would find that difficult to agree with, and we will have the opportunity to debate that later on today. I also
Thank you. This remains for me uncosted socialist crap. I mean, it's absolute rubbish. It's just a list of sort of wishful thinking, plucking things off a tree, saying we'd like this one or we'd like that one. It's actually impossible to make a decision on any of this because nothing is costed, and most of what is in here will remain unfulfilled because we won't have the money to do it. Our main problem is not spending money. Our main problem is actually allocating money to those of the highest priority. And I'm amazed that we can put in here and ask us to vote in support of more money for youth beats, when at the same time the SNP government has a policy which I call getting it wrong for every farmer. Now, this policy means that for 2 years, farmers have not been paid. And this is SNP policy, not paying farmers. And yet we're putting an equal emphasis on money for youth beats. I mean, we just get our priorities wrong. Agriculture is one of our most important industries in Dumfries and Galloway, and we should be supporting it. And the Labour part of your partnership should be getting at the SNP to get it right, because at the moment they're getting it wrong for every farmer. And I suggest you start looking again at how your policies are going to work in Dumfries and Galloway.
Yeah, ask Councillor Davison to respond.
I wish simply to say through you, Chairman, to Councillor Charters that I have missed him these past 5 years, and he reminds me just exactly why I did. But I do look forward to proving him wrong.
Councillor Brodie.
Thanks, Leader. I think in your speech you referred to some people not approving of the new administration. I was going to ask who were these people until I listened to Councillor Chatterley's speech before that. Yeah, I think it's not a question of approving. I think that we're looking for an inclusive administration. I think we'll be an honest opposition and we'll treat each matter on their merits, and you've come forward with lots of good ideas in your programme. But I agree with Councillor Maitland. I think we should that we should be consulted and have a little bit input into the administration's programme, and I welcome the fact that you're going to consult with us over the summer. And if Councillor Marshall wants to share my Liberal Democrat manifesto with him, I'm sure any pub in the constituency, maybe the Wayside Inn would be a good place. Of course, he's a member of the administration and he'll be paying. Thank you.
I'm sure that Councillor Marshall will be happy to take you up on that. So, Hislop, you had an additional point.
It was just a couple of points on some of the commitments in here. On page 107, the last bullet point, carry out a full, more comprehensive review of the Council's charging policy across all services. We've done that, and I think we bottled it, is how you would determine what we actually did. And another one, just for my clarity, on page 113, the third one from the bottom, continue the policy of no compulsory redundancies. Can I ask when that policy was implemented, and is the current policy not the case that we have no compulsory redundancies unless as a last resort, which isn't what is in the paper? And I would like that clarified for the record, please, because there seems to be a case that people are saying there's no compulsory redundancies. My understanding that isn't factually correct.
Thanks, Councillor Hislop. In terms of the review of the Council's charging policy, certain aspects of the charging policy came to light after the charging policy was implemented, and that's why we wish to review it. You'll recall there were strong concerns from adults with disabilities, for example, who were having to pay multiples of what they'd had to pay previously, and that we want to look at some of those aspects again in view of really of fairness to the people who are being charged. I'll ask the Chief Executive to elaborate on the policy of no compulsory redundancies. You will be aware, of course, that that is a commitment both of the Labour Party and of the Scottish Nationalist Government as well.
Certainly it has been the Council's position that in the preparation of all budgets that we would not be looking towards compulsory redundancies. I think I would ask Paul Clarkin just to clarify the exact policy reference to that, but certainly in the preparation of bringing forward budgets on behalf of the Council, we've always worked in the custom, the practice, and accepted that there'd be no compulsory redundancies in relation to that activity. But I'll ask Paul to clarify that.
Leader, I can confirm that when we changed the policy on redundancies, we in fact moved to a position of no compulsory redundancies. Previously, the Councillor Hislop is correct that it was as a last resort. So there was a small nuance there a few years ago when we revised our official policy on that.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks very much, Leader. And I too miss Councillor Charteris, his capitalist claptrap when he came into here. And you talk about lacklustre comments with Councillor Carruthers. Well, there you go. I believe this is an aspirational and an inspirational plan moving forward, not debilitating and putting barriers in place of our good ideas, and hopefully some good ideas coming from the opposition as well. I think this is a live document. We have to go through processes, as the Chief Exec has actually said, so that there will be opportunities for members to actually input and try and improve on what is actually there. So with that in mind, Chair, I would like to suggest that we go with the recommendations as suggested in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Dryburgh. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Leader. I think it's quite appropriate that at this time we need to give direction to the officers to actually work up the detail, which I think all the members will be looking for in terms of how it fits in with existing business plans, how they need to change, how it would be costed, etc. So it's right that we give direction now, because that is effectively our role, so that the proper full plans can come back. And with that in mind, I would second Councillor Dryburgh.
Okay. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much indeed. I think the problem is that not all of us absolutely like what you are proposing costing up. So I think, and we hope maybe that we could come to some arrangement. So I would suggest as an amendment, please, that we accept 2.1, we delete 2.2, and 2.3, remove the first few words and start 2.2, agree that a draft council plan is presented at full council meeting on 26th September 2017, following consultations between groups over the summer recess.
A seconder for Councillor Maitland's motion? Councillor.
Happy to second.
Are we content to move for a vote? We have a motion to accept the recommendations proposed by Councillor Dryburgh and seconded by Councillor Thompson. And we have an amendment proposed by Councillor Maitland and seconded by Councillor Hislop.
Okay. Proceed to the vote. Leader?
Motion.
Deputy Leader?
Motion.
Councillor Bell?
Amendment.
Councillor Brodie?
Amendment.
Councillor Campbell, Dougie Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor John Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor Crothers?
Amendment.
Councillor Charteris?
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster?
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough?
Motion.
Councillor Fairbairn?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Motion.
Councillor Gilroy?
Amendment.
Councillor Giusti?
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman?
Motion.
Councillor Howie?
Amendment.
Councillor Hislop? Councillor Ingalls?
Amendment.
Councillor James?
Amendment.
Councillor Johnson?
Amendment.
Councillor Lever?
Motion.
Councillor Little?
Motion.
Councillor McGregor?
Amendment.
Councillor Maitland?
Amendment.
Councillor Marshall?
Motion.
Councillor Martin?
Motion.
Councillor McClelland?
Motion.
Councillor McComb?
Amendment.
Councillor McKee?
Motion.
Councillor Nicholl?
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson?
Motion.
Councillor Ronnie?
Amendment.
Councillor Sloan?
Motion.
Councillor Stitt?
Motion.
Councillor Surtees?
Motion.
Councillor Tate?
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson?
Motion.
Councillor Wilson?
Motion.
Councillor Wood?
Motion.
Councillor Young?
Motion.
The motion is carried by 22 votes to 18.
Thank you, Rona. Can we move now to item 7? Item 7 gives members a summary of the activity of the Council's Armed Forces Champion, Councillor Archie Dryborough, for the period 1st of April 2016 to 31st of March 2017. I'm sure all members will want to join with me in commending Councillor Dryborough for the enthusiasm and dedication he brings to this role on our behalf. The report also highlights the success of the Council in being awarded a silver award by the Ministry of Defence's Employer Recognition Scheme, as an application has been submitted to the MOD for their consideration to award Dumfries and Galloway a Council Gold Award status. Before I open the item up to debate, can I ask Councillor Dryborough to say a few words about his past year as Armed Forces Champion, and I will then open up the meeting to members' debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. It's been a privilege in being the Armed Forces Champion for Dumfries and Galloway. I think the support in Dumfries and Galloway by the people of Dumfries and Galloway has outshone any other area. Indeed, in the Armed Forces case on Saturday, the Armed Forces Parade in Glasgow, for instance, there was no Armed Forces Parade, which I think was not right, although there were some Armed Forces events in Glasgow. When I look at what's happened over the past year, can I pay particular attention to our young people who attended the Battle of Arras commemoration at Edinburgh Castle and laid a wreath on behalf of the young people of Scotland, Charlotte Bryden and Hannah Alley. And also we had two young people from Dumfries High School, Will Parry and Conal Anderson, who actually went to France on behalf of the region. I think it's right, Chair, that we pay our respects to those in school who are actually taking as part of the curriculum what the Armed Forces actually do. I have to thank also Derek Crichton and his staff for actually supporting me during that time, in particular Hazel Kerr and Jan Nye and Chris Woodness, who have been very supportive of me and making sure I attend places at the right time, at the right place, and things like that. I also want to thank Lillian Kringle for applying for the Gold Award, because it's better actually coming from an employee of the Council. I have to say that I had a meeting after the South of Scotland Alliance with the Reserve Forces and Cadets Association person who's looking at the Gold Award and hopefully enhanced that application, and we will find out within the next few months. There are something like 68 applications in this year's attempt to get the Gold Award, and they reckon about 18 actually get it. I'm hopeful that Dumfries and Galloway actually gets the Gold Award, because the employer is actually very supportive of our reserve forces and cadet instructors within the organisation. I think, Chair, that I also want to thank every member that attended an Armed Forces event in the last week, because it shows our community that we do support the Armed Forces, and our community support the Armed Forces as well. Next year, Leader, is the 100th anniversary of the final year of the First World War, and I'm hoping to improve on what was done over the past few years by having a larger type event, certainly on the Saturday, and I hope that I can get the support of this chamber. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dryburgh. Do members have any comments or questions? Right, we've got Councillor Giusti, followed by Councillor Charteris, and Councillor Hislop, and Councillor James.
Thank you, Leader. I would just like to thank Councillor Dryburgh, because yesterday I led, on behalf of the council, I had made a speech for lowering the flag, and afterwards I had the pleasure of chatting with some of our veterans, all of whom had great words to say for Councillor Dryburgh and his work that he's been doing over the past year. So I'd like to congratulate him, and that he's doing well across the whole region and not just Dumfries.
Thanks for that, Councillor Giusti.
Yes, well, I'd like to add my congratulations to our Armed Forces champion, who's done a great job, and in particular, I would like to bring out two parts of the work he's done, one of which is with the cadets of all three services. He's given them huge support and been very inclusive on the way he's brought them into events in Dumfries and Galloway. And secondly, and maybe not so well known, how much he does for those servicemen who are disadvantaged, poor, injured, suffer mental problems, and he is always there for them. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Charteris. Councillor Hislop.
Chair, it was just to echo some of the points already made. I had the privilege of going along to Carnsala. Councillor Dryburgh was there that day, and the work that he, along with the volunteers at the Veterans Garden Project, were doing, it made me feel humble to see what some of those guys had come through and where they're going. So, well done in that.
Thank you, Councillor Hislop. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Dryburgh is obviously a fantastic Armed Forces champion. Along the sort of community council trail, I've heard that First World War memorials, one may get a 70% grant for restoration during this centenary period. Is that true, and are we making use of that?
Councillor Dryburgh.
Thank you, Chair. There's about £500,000 left in the pot from the Scottish Government for improvements in war memorials across the region. And I have asked officers who are in charge of war memorials and things like that to have a look at that. It's a bit unreal that we only have something in the region of £2,500 in a budget for war memorials, but we can actually access these grants to improve war memorials. So we are, in all the areas, 4 areas, actually getting the officers to go around checking what their war memorials are actually like and try to improve them. So there is a grant left of around about £500,000, which came out in 2014, that we've asked officers to look at and see if we can come with one bid for the whole area, basically.
Thank you, Councillor Dryburgh. Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, just knowing Archie well, I know how seriously he takes his role and how well thought of he is amongst all the veterans and everyone involved in the armed forces. It's really just to give a recent example of his dedication. He went along to Annan Army cadets and got his legs waxed, but it wasn't just 1 or 2 strips. He insisted on getting both legs waxed right up to the knees. So, and I think he's got a regular appointment in the future to do it on a regular basis. So that's a level of his dedication.
Thank you for that, Councillor Marshall. I'm glad he didn't include the photographs in his report. Have any further questions or comments for Councillor Dryburgh? Right. Thank you. Thank you all for that. We now move on to the recommendations, which is to consider recommendation 1 and note recommendation 2. Are members content to do so? Thank you. We move on to item 8. Following the resignation of the current head of economic development, recruitment and selection, we are being asked to determine the arrangements for the appointment to the post in future. Paul Clarkin, the head of Organisational Development, Human Resources and Assets, is here to answer any questions. Now, from discussion with colleagues, I know that there was some concerns about the timescale that we're being asked to agree, and I wondered also maybe if that, in particular, that if a person was appointed on the 29th of September and has to give, say, 12 weeks' notice, and maybe has holidays that they still have to take, that they would not be able to take up their post as required at the beginning of January. So I wondered if maybe we could have some discussion or further information about how much flexibility there is if we agree this appointment today.
Leader, what I've presented there is an outline timetable, a suggested timetable. It allows us to put some dates in place and also to make arrangements for assessment centre, but clearly you've outlined the period that it actually takes from the start of the process to the end of the process. And that in fact, with the current timetable, someone wouldn't be in place until beyond January.
Have I got any? Councillor McGregor.
It's just a slight question. On pages 127, 128 and 129, it makes reference to leadership quite a few times, takes responsibility for the leadership of the functions and services assigned, lead this, lead that, lead various projects, provide leadership vision. And yet in the job description, the recognised leadership qualification is only a desirable, not an essential. And I wonder if there's a rationale behind that, given that it's clearly very much a leadership role, why they do not have to have a leadership qualification.
Mr. Clarkin.
It's actually possible to get that leadership qualification, so we're not actually setting the bar that would exclude people who are otherwise qualified to do. But we can actually put them through a leadership programme to achieve those aspects.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks. Just to ask the officer, are we planning training for the elected members who will be part of the process here to make sure that we apply the employment and equality law?
I certainly hope so.
I believe there's already a date in the council diary for that in August in advance of the process commencing.
Any further questions? Okay, are you content to agree recommendations 1 and 2? Item 9 is the minutes of the Nithsdale Area Committee of the 7th of June 2017. Councillor Bell, you have a question.
Leader, they're inaccurate. 6.3, if you look at the decision made on Nithsdale, 6.3, the appointment of elected members to the Common Good Subcommittee as follows. Graham Bell, Ian Blake, John Charteris and Malcolm Johnson. We didn't agree to sit on that. So there's a mistake, clearly a mistake there.
Councillor Stitt.
Leader, I didn't agree to join either.
I'm also advised that Councillor Davidson didn't agree to it either. So,
Leader,
I think we need to withdraw this paper if there's actual mistakes in the minute. Thanks. We can tend to withdraw the paper. We can resubmit it in a future council meeting. Okay, we now move to the final item, which I think is probably maybe the most contentious one actually on the agenda today. The final item provides members with the... I'll wait a minute just to get a little quiet, okay? The final item provides members with the outcome of the formal publication of the White Sand Project, or the scheme as it's referred to, undertaken in accordance with the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act of 2009, the 2009 Act, and the associated flood risk management regulations from 2010 on flood protection schemes, potentially vulnerable areas and local planned districts. These are the 2010 regulations. The report seeks members' approval to make a preliminary decision to confirm the scheme without modifications and thereafter to notify the Scottish Ministers of that decision pursuant to Schedule 2 of the 2009 Act, and in communicating that decision to Scottish Ministers, seek confirmation from them that the scheme will be called in for their determination rather than deferring to the Council to hold a public hearing. I want us to be clear about the decisions we are being asked to make today. And we're not revisiting the decisions taken on the 29th of December, and we're not here to discuss the merits of alternative schemes. There will be other opportunities for that. This paper was presented to the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee for decision under its scheme of delegation. However, as some members had reported in advance that they had been unable to access all the objections, the EEI Committee agreed to refer the decision to full Council today. The formal notification period on the scheme agreed by the EEI Committee on the 19th of December and full Council on 29th of December last year closed on the 15th of March. We are now required to make a preliminary decision in accordance with Schedule 2, Clause 5.1 of the 2009 Act, and we have three options. We can confirm without modification, we can confirm with modification, or we can reject. Officers' advice is that no new and different objections have been submitted. Those objections which could be accommodated within the scheme had already been accommodated in the final scheme as agreed on the 19th and 29th of December, and therefore we are invited to confirm the scheme without modification. If that is agreed, objectors will be notified and responses to individual objections will be provided to those objectors. Scottish Ministers will receive notice of the decision to confirm the scheme without modification. They will also receive the scheme documents, a summary of the objections and copies of all the objections and other related documents. In accordance with the partnership agreement, which was agreed to go into the next stages of Council consideration, Ministers will also be asked to call in the scheme and to hold a public local inquiry, which would allow the objections submitted to be considered by an independent reporter and give the objectors the opportunity to present their evidence to the reporter. James MacLeod will take any questions on the report. Willie Porteous and Michael Smith are also in attendance. Gary McGovern, the solicitor of Pinsent Mason, is also in attendance to answer any questions of a legal nature. And I'll open up the meeting to member debate. Councillor Dryburgh.
Chair, it's just firstly to agree recommendation 1, which is to withdraw delegation to Economy, Environment and Infrastructure so it can be held.
Our members agree to do that? I think we can do that at this early stage. We just agree the first recommendation. Councillor Crothers.
Thanks, Leader. I'm just to start off with, I'm looking in particular for reassurances in regards to that we're following a proper due process when it comes to this actual decision today, if we go forward and make it, depending on what the decision is. But ultimately, are we complying with the Act that we referred to today in regards to flood prevention? I think my understanding of the Act is that we have to consider, as a council, as a whole, we have to consider the objections that are in front of us, which I think we've got 344. One of them's 18 pages long. It's the only one I'll probably refer to, is the one from the SOS or Save Our Sands, because of the level of detail contained within that. But I just need to be absolutely clear before we do process, I know you've already touched on that we're making a competent decision by moving on today without having, I feel, actually considered and gone back and try to negotiate with the objectors in regards to how to modify. We've been through a previous consultation where we are at a new point in time now, and we should be starting from here where we are. I don't think the council, my view is that the council hasn't considered these properly, and I'll come on to that later on if I get a chance, Leader. But certainly from a point of view, are we going through a proper process in regards to making a safe and competent decision?
Can I ask Mr McGovern to give his advice as to whether or not the due process required by law is being followed?
In my view, it is being followed. The Act requirements at the stage where you're making a preliminary decision are quite straightforward. As has been pointed out, the obligation on the Council is to consider the objections and any other representations or relevant matters that are brought before them. There's a distinction between considering something, which put very simply just means to think very carefully about it before making a decision, and any negotiation or attempts to resolve. Those are two separate things. All of the representations have been made available. They've been carefully considered, and the views of the project team are set out in the report, but also been made separately available for members in hard copy and electronically. And I'm sure, as the questions will show, have been carefully read and considered. As I say, it's a very simple obligation at this stage to consider, think carefully, and then take a decision. There will be further procedural steps that will follow hereafter, depending on the outcome of today.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Dave. If you don't mind, I'll just come back after having that reassurance, and I'll refer to it is the White Sands project. We've got it contained as a separate item. I've numbered the pages, being the front page being number 1, and I'll just refer to page 9, which is, if you can, I don't know what it is. There's no, I didn't number this myself, and there's a whole raft of different references there in regards to that. It says DGC, which I think it stands for Dumfries and Galloway Council. It says design team have not given proper consideration and to the conservation area status of the White Sands, and it goes on to say at the next paragraph, which is the second full paragraph, Dumfries and Galloway Council design proposals are contrary to policy OP1, development considerations, and it puts some extra meat on that, and there's a raft of paragraphs down there, so every one in that page 9 for instance. Now we have a pro forma response to all our objectives, which is Appendix 4, it's in regards to our report. So just, and as far as those questions, if we've got to look at this thoroughly, Leader, can we look at that page in particular, take each of these objections, representations made, and consider them just even here today and say, whereabouts in Appendix 4, in regards to them, have we responded in an appropriate manner to each objector?
I will ask Mr MacLeod to respond to that. But I think there's actually a misunderstanding in terms of your question. There is actually a misunderstanding of the process that we're required to go through, because the response to the objectors happens after we've made this decision. At least that's certainly my understanding. Mr MacLeod, can you elucidate?
Can we, just as a matter of clarity, can you confirm the page in the document? I'm looking at the
what I've got hasn't actually got a page number 2, James. I apologise for that. It was left in our. We asked for some hard copies in regards to representations. It was the White Sands itself. There was SEPA and Think Scottish Water along with that, separately bound copy. And we've got Save Our Sands Group SOS objections to White Sands Flood Protection Scheme and Public Realm Improvements 2017. I'm seeing that as being page 1. I've numbered them thereafter, and it's page 9 that I referred to.
Leader, we don't have these documents.
No, I didn't have this document either, so it is rather difficult to follow it when we haven't got the documentation. I presume this is documentation actually provided by Save Our Sands. It's not any documentation that's been provided by the council.
Leader, I can certainly answer that, Leader, and as far as this was on the website, we found so difficult to try and understand and get round about. This is in the public domain, and this is what we should have read in order for us as councillors to consider the objections and representation. This is part of the information that's in the public domain and part of the representations. We as a group, we raised this point last week. We said, listen, we are finding it very difficult between problems we're having with our information technology, our computers, laptops, so on and so forth. We were finding it difficult to access online. We asked for hard copies, and this is the information that we got, and as far as I'm aware, every other group got some of these as well. We were certainly told that to be fair and balanced. So these hard copies were passed around the council.
Do you want, Mr MacLeod, do you have the document? Do you want an adjournment so you can go through these? So? Councillor Nicholson.
Yes, I mean, this is documentation. It's a hard copies that we're talking about and information that was on the website. I looked at the information on the website. I've looked in the, it's for information for us. Now, if, so everybody had that information, everybody's got that information, so I've taken cognizance of that, and I've looked at that, and I've no questions on that.
I'm not actually convinced that this is actually the information that needs to be discussed at this point, because I think this is the answers to these questions will be made to the objectors if this process goes forward. Mr MacLeod, am I correct in that assumption?
What's the point in consulting with people if we're not going to consider their objections and we're going to make a decision prior to considering their objections? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. But this is not what we are being asked to do today. We are not considering the objections. We are considering whether we have a choice of 3 courses of action. One is to confirm with modification, one is to confirm without modification, one is to reject. That's all we're being asked to do today. No, you reject the scheme. Right.
Sorry.
Mr McGovern.
Can I just clarify? The process today is to take the decision before Council today is to take the preliminary decision. It's not the final decision to confirm the scheme. There will be further process that will take place between now and then. So this is not the final decision, the preliminary decision. The obligation in taking that preliminary decision is to consider the objections. There's no obligation to resolve the objections, to negotiate the objections, to respond to the objections. The obligation is to take the preliminary decision having considered the content of the objections that have been made to date. And
Thanks for that, Councillor Hislop.
Chair, how can we consider objections or have considered them as a council if we haven't seen them? As Councillor Dempster said, he hasn't received the documentation. Not all councillors have. Therefore, this council couldn't have considered them. The officers may have considered them, but the council hasn't.
The documents are in the public domain. The fact that Councillor Dempster maybe hasn't had the IT capability to look at them is not necessarily a germane to our decision
although I
today.
may have seen them, what I said was they're not present here today, was what I said.
Thanks for that
And anything
clarification.
that's discussed should be present with members at the time it's being discussed.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Leader. I mean, the point I was trying to make is that there's a raft of objections there. We're being asked to consider, if you look at its recommendation 2.5, that refers to the Appendix 4, which is if we make the decision today to approve the scheme as it stands, that Appendix 4 will get sent out to every representative to say this is your answer in the short term. And what I'm asking is, to be absolutely clear, taking into consideration page number 9 in regards to the Save Our Sands, that's only one small part of the objection and representations made. Is Appendix 4, is it fit for purpose? I don't believe it is, just in that one small part. It doesn't answer all the questions, but I'm asking for it from an official point of view. Does it actually answer these points? So I'm just getting clarity in regards to that. I think we need to be we need to be here making safe decisions, safe and competent decisions, and that's certainly my thoughts, Leader.
Yeah, but what we're being asked to do is today, as Mr McGovern has explained to us, is to make a preliminary decision, having considered the objections now, the advice we're getting, and I certainly have no reason to doubt that advice or to have contrary view on that advice, is that the objections cannot be ameliorated in terms of the scheme. It's not possible to amend the scheme to answer those objections. So what we're being asked to do is to make a preliminary decision in terms of what we do with it now and what we would be doing if we agree to send it forward without modification. If we accept that we cannot further modify the scheme as it stands to take account of those objections, we then submit that to Scottish ministers along with the objections, because the objections will go up there. The copies of the objections will go up there. We are also asking that the reporter takes those objections, where they would be able to, where all the objectors will be able to go and present their evidence to the reporter and allow the reporter to make a recommendation to Scottish ministers and Scottish ministers to make a decision on them. Mr MacLeod? Oh, no. Mr Herriot.
Thank you, Leader. Yes. In terms of the objections, they have been reviewed, and there's been a significant amount of time spent with the team in reviewing the objections, and they have come to the decision and made the recommendation to EEI last week and to full council this week that council confirm or make the preliminary decision on the scheme without modification. The objections have been reviewed, and as you've said, Leader, it is the design team and officers' view that there are not modifications to be made to the scheme that would address these objections, and in fact, that the detail of the objections should be considered at public inquiry and we are putting out in Appendix 4 of the report, we're showing the correspondence that's going back to those that have objected, and we offer to continue to meet with those that have objected, to continue to inform that process with a view to preparing us for inquiry and removing those objections where they can be resolved and explained and understood. But ultimately, if the objections still stand, our recommendation is that we deal with those at public inquiry in detail.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks very much, Leader. I mean, I'll make this point, but just to try and put it into context, so moving away from the Save Our Sands, it's mentioned within the Appendix 4 that, listen, if dredging isn't an option because it's such a little impact in regards to the size and scale of a flood, it would be millimetres, I think it's referred to within Appendix 4, so therefore dredging isn't an option. Now, some folk think maybe it would be a viable option, but anyways, but it says, but like I say, dredging, take material from the basin of the river will not be effective. Yet, if we take, it says flooding in other parts of the area, it says it in the Nunham area. In fact, if we take some silty material away from the Devagilla Bridge, that'll actually have an impact of 2 inches, which is 50 millimetres approximately. So it'll drop the water by 50 millimetres there by moving some material from the Devagilla Bridge, but it won't actually have any effect in real terms at the White Sands itself. And that's a difficult concept to get a grasp of it and understand. And that's why I'm coming back to, is Appendix 4 is the question fit for purpose in addressing as being a pro forma letter? That's what we're agreeing to in recommendation 2.5 for what I can see. We're saying, listen, this is what we'll send up to every representative after the decision today, say this covers your points pretty much. And in fact, it may well be on the back of that as well. In fact, we'll ask at Scottish Government hold a public local inquiry, but that's at their discretion, not the council's. That is at their discretion.
Come back to the point that we're not actually discussing the objection, not here to discuss the individual objections today. Councillor Drybrough.
I was going to say exactly the same thing, Chair. I mean, we're here to look at the process and how we take it actually forward and get the objectors, the opportunity yet again to put their objections forward. With that in mind, Chair, I mean, whether it's dredging, that's gone through a process it's already been through. We need to look at this process and take it forward to a conclusion. I think any other thing than not going with the recommendations means we're going to hold this project back, and it may increase the cost for the council. So with that in mind, I would say we go with the recommendations, Chair.
I'll second.
Councillor Nicholson, that's a motion, Councillor Drybrough, that will go with the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Charters.
It's been a whole problem, this, with the public, in as much as they do not support this scheme. And we've seen it in a whole range of the way they've objected to it, whether it's been in the press or whether it's been by petition or whether it's been by objection. And I'm well aware that the SNP government said that they would not proceed with this type of scheme if there was not public support for it. And I see virtually no public support for this scheme. I see only objection. And it looks as if this is a sort of a socialist way of bludgeoning the opposition. You're just bludgeoning it down, saying we're not going to listen to you, we're not going to have any interest in this, we're just going to carry out our council procedures and ignore what the public want. Quite a number of the SNP councillors, protected, campaigned against this. Now we see them rolling over at the first sign of opposition from the Labour partners. And they seem to be now going along with what the socialists want. I have to tell you that this project is ill-conceived, it has an unpopular design, it is intrusive, it is very expensive, it has no popular support. You could say it's a sort of project that we put forward by an out-of-touch socialist policy. The Conservatives, I remind you, wholly campaigned against this scheme in the local election, which we comprehensively won. It was one of our main principles that we would oppose, all of us, the flood prevention scheme in the White Sands. And I will certainly be voting against it of any modification at this meeting. it is perhaps worth reminding ourselves, again going back to farmers, that this is a flood scheme for the White Sands. It has absolutely no relevance except that it's going to increase flooding at Nunham and it's going to increase the flooding in Kirkton. Only 5 houses were flooded in Dumfries. In Kirkton, we had 7 farms and 11 houses flooded, and the council did absolutely nothing about it. We have 2 farmers, one of whom has had to spend £30,000 of his own money in repairing the flood bank, and another farmer who spent over £200,000, which he had to do, in repairing his flood bank, with no help from the government. And we are comparing what is going on.
Councillor Charters have got a Councillor McKee.
Just a point of information for Councillor Charters. I recognise that he's not old enough to remember the Second World War. But if you go up the...
I am.
Oh, sorry about that.
Indeed. Get your facts right.
But if you go up the river from Dumfries right up to Algarth and above, you'll find bankings beside the river. Those bankings were put there to stop the agricultural land from flooding, which reduced obviously the flood effect on Dumfries at that time. But by building these bankings, obviously the water couldn't spread out, so it had all to run down to Dumfries. And that's where the problem started. And I'm not asking farmers, obviously, to take those bankings away to flood their land to save Dumfries. We're looking to do something in that place. We want to put bankings in Dumfries to stop flooding Dumfries. So it's only a continuation of what happened up the river during or before World War II.
Councillor Charters.
That goes back a long way. What I'm saying is we have produced a scheme for the White Sands only, and we have no idea where this surplus water is going to go. We don't know whether it's going to Castle Dykes, we don't know whether it's going to go to Kirkton, we don't know whether it's going across the East Bank, because it's such a narrow view on the flooding problem that whatever happens, this flooding problem is likely to go somewhere else. And we have seen it in Kirkton, those of us who live in Kirkton, of the huge burden which farmers have to pay in order to prevent flooding of other places in Dumfries. And we just ignore what's going on and focus on this White Sands project, which I say is ill-conceived and unwanted. And I suggest we're ploughing ahead on this, and there's going to be huge opprobrium from the public against those who vote to have it continued.
Councillor Charters, I'm going to ask Mr MacLeod to address the specific problems that you refer to in respect of Kirkton and other places, but can I actually reiterate what we are going to do, just for the avoidance of doubt, that the objections we are asking the Scottish ministers, we will be providing the Scottish ministers with all the documentation, all the objections, all the notes. We will be asking them to hold a public local inquiry where an independent reporter will consider all the evidence, where the objectors can present their evidence again to somebody totally independent of Dumfries and Galloway Council. There won't be any aspect that, they would say that, would they, or they got a vested interest. It will be totally independent. And do keep describing me as a socialist, because I'm always very proud to be described as a socialist. I've got Councillor Fairbairn. Oh, sorry, Mr MacLeod, can you answer the technical points, please?
We have a motion on the table. In the absence of amendment, can the question just not be put?
It was seconded. It was seconded by Councillor Nicholson. I'm just allowed a little more. So expecting the amendment. I'll ask Mr MacLeod to answer the technical questions. We do have Mr MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. With respect to the statement made that the White Sands scheme would make flooding worse in other locations, a significant amount of work has been undertaken to mitigate any increased water levels elsewhere. As has been identified, there is a small increase associated with the scheme at Nunham, and that has been mitigated by the removal of the material build-up under the easternmost arch of the Devergilla Bridge, where approximately half the arch is filled with material. The impact of the scheme further upstream is negligible to absolutely nothing impact when we get up as far as Kirkton. And the reason for this is simply that the water that's passing down through the White Sands, by containing it within the flood defences, there is a slight increase in velocities, so the same amount of water is passed downstream, but with no increase in water level associated with that.
Councillor Fairbairn indicated he wished to speak, and Councillor Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yeah, 2 points really, 2 quick points. On the back of Council Charterist, this was the SNP Council's stance prior to the Happy Coalition. Andy Ferguson, then Leader of the SNP, would say he would put the brakes on Labour's vanity project and will ensure the public will have the final say on an expanded suite of solutions. It is time for the people who live in Dumfries and Galloway to live up to the consequences of this project, to be allowed to make the final decision, not 43 councillors from across the region. And my second point is, we've got a lot of stuff on why we can build it and why we can't build it. My main point here is historical accuracy. Now, I was speaking to a well-known historian the other day there, and he told me that if they dig up the White Sands, we're talking about putting the brakes on it straight away because of the historical significance and artefacts we would find. So what would we do then? It could be stopped for 2 years, 3 years. What, have we factored that into the overall plan?
Mr MacLeod? Mr MacLeod, do you have a response?
Thank you, Leader. In terms of historical significance, we've engaged with the officers within the authority, and we have no indication as to the works we were doing would lead to any discovery of historical artefacts, with the exception of working within the proximity of the Devergilla Bridge, whereas where you'll be aware from previous reports to Council that there's been significant discussions with Historic Environment Scotland with regards to the Scheduled Ancient Monument.
Thank you, Mr MacLeod. I've now got Councillor Davidson, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Bell, Councillor Gilroy and Councillor Maitland wishing Councillor Johnson, you also indicated. So it'll be Councillor Davidson, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Bell, Councillor Gilroy, Councillor Maitland and Councillor James, did you? Councillor James. And then can we move to the motion which sits on the table, please? Okay, Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Leader. I think in common with you, I do rather enjoy being called a socialist by Councillor Charters. It is perhaps somewhat unaccustomed for me, but nevertheless enjoyable. Please, sir, carry on. What I would say, and I think perhaps he brings out both the worst and the best in me, it remains to be seen which, is that it can hardly be described as bludgeoning to refer this matter to a body over which we have no influence or authority as a council. That's not bludgeoning something through by any shape of the imagination. He will use any term that he sees fit, but it is not an accurate description. We are sending this for an independent assessment at which every objector is entitled and empowered to give evidence. And it is, as I say, a process over which we have neither authority nor control. It is entirely independent of us, not exactly bludgeoning. Paragraphs 3.16 and 3.17 encapsulate very neatly why this is a sensible idea. A public local inquiry provides an opportunity for a fresh consideration of the scheme through an external process. In 3.17, it will allow those who have outstanding objections to present evidence to Scottish ministers or a reporter appointed on their behalf. These are exactly the reasons why it should go to a public local inquiry. There was very substantial objection to the scheme. There was very substantial objection to the original scheme, which erected ramparts that were almost on a par with the walls of Berwick-upon-Tweed. It was absolutely massive. The scheme that we now have is massively different from the scheme to which there was such a huge amount of perfectly justifiable objection. It's chalk and cheese. It's night and day. Nevertheless, we will refer it to an independent body over which we have neither authority nor control, and they will look at it and they will decide whether we have a good scheme or a bad scheme, or whether we can amend it and make it a better scheme or go back to the drawing board. And we have, incidentally, committed to implement whatever those findings are. We have been doing this since 2012. if not before. We started this process as a result of public engagement and a charrette. The trouble is, that is now so far in the distant past that it has almost been forgotten, but that is where we started. Ultimately, there has to be a question of whether Dumfries should or should not have flood defences. I think most people in this room agree that Dumfries should have flood defences, but at no point has there been any coalescence of agreement on what exactly they ought to be. And yet, nevertheless, we ought to make progress. We ought to make best use of the resources that we have already expended on this matter up until now. The best way forward to look at what we have done and work out what is good and what needs to be improved is to have that independent look at the matter. And that is where we have arrived as an administration, and that is the proposal that we have laid before the Council.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Leader. I think it's perfectly clear here there's no consensus at this stage, and in fact I'd probably say any stage in this whole process. There are different factions for and against, and they're extremely entrenched in their views. I think that's a statement of fact. We think that a public local inquiry will actually we know that it takes it out with the public, this council's control into the independent arena, which is exactly what we said we would do. And it provides an opportunity to revisit the scheme, amongst other things, that's before us. It should allay the public fears, and I think that's what really this should be all about here. And it will also ensure that all contributors are given an equal say and an equal footing when they put their views to the appointed person charged by the Scottish Government to take control of the PLI, or the local inquiry. For me, it allows the public, which is what I've always said, and I don't need lessons from anybody of what I said before the election. I was elected on a manifesto that actually says what this is. And it will allow the public to be heard in a legal process, and it should reassure them, amongst others, of other things, the flooding impacts and everything else is taken forward. I think it's also important to note here is that the council are committed to being transparent. Some people might, well, they didn't laugh, so they must agree with that. And they're forwarding all the correspondence, more in fact than they have to do, to the Scottish ministers when this is referred, that is the plan. And that includes all the objectors, and I would suggest all those who are in favour. So we've got a position right now, and I think we need to move forward. We can't have the regional capital flooding on a fairly regular basis. Every ward in this town, every street in this town is affected when the White Sands floods. It's not a White Sands issue, it's a whole town issue, and as such should be viewed as that. But I would absolutely support the motion that's going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I've now got Councillor Johnson, Councillor Bell, Councillor Gilroy, Councillor Maitland, Councillor James. Then we will move to the motion as proposed by Councillor Dryburgh and seconded by Councillor Nicholson, and any amendment which other members wish to put forward. Councillor Johnson.
There's been a lot of talk about manifestos. Two big parts of our manifesto was clearly against this particular scheme. Also, another part of our manifesto centred on keeping local decisions local, and we were concerned about powers being taken from local councils and moved to Edinburgh. And it strikes me that perhaps we're actually moving this decision up to Edinburgh, perhaps as a bit of a security blanket to hide behind it, because we all know from speaking to the people, reading the objections, that the people of Dumfries are against this particular scheme. And I think now is the time that we can stand up and just reject the scheme. It's what they want us to do.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Certainly a significant number of people in Dumfries are opposed to the scheme, although actually a lot of the opposition was to the original scheme, not actually the revised scheme. But there are also quite a lot of people who are in support of the scheme. But I would say this is not a decision, although it will be signed off by ministers, it will be an independent reporter who considers the evidence. It is not a political person, it's an independent reporter who will consider that evidence. Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Leader. It's really a bit on 2.8, you know, when they talk about compensation to the business owners and losses during the construction phase. There's nothing really in the report that we've had in the past, or, you know, it's been raised by the objectors. How long the construction time would last? Would it last months, years, maybe decades? I'm just wondering, there's nothing there concrete to say about it. And you say, when Councillor Ferguson was saying about just recently, a minute ago, about flooding in Dumfries, it affects people in Dumfries. Well, if there's years of disruption, this will be the death knell of Dumfries. We've had the DG1. We're heading for the DG2 now. What concerns me is that there's no timescales on the construction time and how long it's going to take. We need answers on that.
I think the important thing about the proposals on compensation is that businesses will be compensated during the construction process and not at the end of the construction process, which is what the law requires. But I will defer to Mr MacLeod and his colleagues, or Mr McGovern, to answer the rest of your question.
Thank you, Leader. If I take on the construction, we have indicated previously that construction times will be dependent in part on how, in discussion with the public and the communities, we could work quite extensively across the whole of the White Sands from top to bottom, which would be massively disruptive, but be a shorter construction period. We could alternatively take a longer period of time and thus minimising disruption across the full area. And as we've said during within the paper, we are very supportive of the businesses down there to see that the construction works do not cause them to fail because of lack of business, and we're looking at every way possible to support them during the construction phase. Gary McGovern will answer some further questions.
Yes, just to confirm what the report says is correct, in that the statutory provisions relating to compensation are triggered where there are claims where there is evidence, demonstrable evidence of depreciation in value or disturbance leading to losses, which would suggest compensation usually being paid towards the end of a process as the operations are being carried out. That's sort of basic legal framework, whereas as the report notes, that, as James has explained, the Council are now looking at options to try and bring forward that process, the compensation scheme being fleshed out at another point, which would go beyond what the Act would require to be done.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gilroy.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just slightly enjoying Councillor Ferguson's U-turn. I'd never know you had a female side to you like that, Councillor Ferguson. I thought it was only ladies that could change their mind quite so spectacularly. Anyway, we digress. Or liberals, yes. I do support Councillor Johnson. I campaigned on local decisions made by local government, which is the council, by local councillors, for the local people. And, you know, we have a huge number of objections here to this project, and not many people coming forward supporting it, I have to say. What I would like to know is the timing of such a independent public local inquiry or public hearing, and the cost.
Okay. Mr McGovern, can you explain this?
The timing is hard to be certain because it would depend on the reporters unit within the Scottish Government and the availability of reporters at a venue and so on. So there are a lot of variables. I would expect, and the indications that they give would suggest that it might, you might expect that to take place within 6 months of the case officer or reporter being appointed. Costs, I think, would be something that might be unhelpful to speculate on, and that's not, I don't think, the purpose of today's session. The procedural requirements of the Act following the decision today will require notification to the Scottish Ministers, and then the procedure will follow on from that. So I don't think the decision today should hinge on a consideration of what the costs of an inquiry would be.
And I'm right also, though, in saying that in requesting the Scottish Government does it, that the Scottish Government would pick up the tab for it.
Chair, can I just come back on that? I find that extraordinary that we don't consider the cost of going to a public local inquiry when this project is already escalating in its costs. we have no idea what it's going to cost the council, or if it does cost the council, it might not. I don't know. I suspect it will. And we're just going to go into this absolutely blind, with a bill at the end of the day, which could be hundreds of thousands of pounds for something that could have been decided today.
Sorry, just to
Mr. McGovern.
Sorry, just to clarify in terms of legal framework, the circumstances we face are that there are valid objections to the scheme, and the Act requires in a scenario where there are valid objections that you notify the Scottish Government. So there is no option, the notification will follow, and it will be for the Scottish Government to decide whether there will be an inquiry, and if they take that decision, then that process will have to be followed.
On that, the third part of this was to refuse, which we could do today. We could refuse this today, and therefore it would not have to go.
You can deal with this today. Put forward an amendment to reject it in total. No, don't shout across the chamber, please. Okay, if you've got a point of clarification, ask for it.
Thank you, and I did say with respect. I think on that basis it states quite clearly in that recommendation that the Scottish Government might not hold an inquiry and then it would fall to the Council, and I think we need to understand the implications of that. If the Scottish Government decided not to hold a public local inquiry, what would then be the cost implication and every other implication if we have to hold a public hearing locally?
Okay, can you respond to that?
Just to go back to the previous point, because there are valid objections under the Act, regardless of which of the three options to proceed or to reject, you would have to notify the Scottish ministers, and they may decide to call it in. So even if you reject it, they might still call it in. In relation to a scenario, it's correct to say that there is no legal obligation, so the Scottish ministers would not be bound to call in the scheme. If they determine that they do wish to call in the scheme, then they would be bound to have an inquiry in that scenario. But you're right, they are not duty bound to call it in. If they did not call in the scheme for their own determination, then it would fall back to the Council, ultimately to take a final decision. It would be incumbent on the Council before taking any final decision to have a hearing process. And if the Council were following the guidance, the Scottish Government guidance, then that hearing process would in many respects replicate an inquiry process. It would be expected that there would be a person appointed to hear evidence and the submissions of the various parties in order to make a recommendation to the Council, which would then have to be considered at further committee in due course before a final decision is taken. So the process may in some respects be similar if it did come back to the Council.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Can I call Councillor Maitland?
Leader, thank you. I will be reasonably brief. Early on, I was really very dubious about this project, but as it's progressed and changed, and we've been shown what it will actually look like and what it will do, I've become more enthusiastic. Every modern city that I've ever visited actively promotes flood prevention, and it seeks by design to maximise commercial benefit and pleasure from riverside access. I will say, however, I would just like to ask whether the Council has quantified and set out the risks to the Council, to the public purse locally, with respect to commercial concerns and compensation. If this lasts for the sort of length of time that people are talking about, there will be distinct commercial risk, and the longer it goes on, arguably, the higher the risk to the Council. What is the risk to the Council? Have we quantified that?
Mr. MacLeod?
Within the cost of the scheme, we have an allowance for risk. The risk pot is £5 million on the scheme. The compensation payments that would be made payable under the scheme, as we've discussed within this committee report, would also be eligible for 80% funding from Scottish Government as part of the scheme. So the risk in that respect is significantly reduced in terms of impact upon the Council, but we would make all efforts to ensure that impact upon businesses was minimised by the manner in which the construction work was undertaken. For example, before occupying any car park on the sands as part of the scheme, we would look to provide re-provision parking at other locations.
Thank you. I call Councillor James, and then we'll proceed to consideration of the motion and any amendment which other councillors wish to put forward.
Thank you. Most of my points were covered by Councillor Johnson, who I think was saying why should we give up the power when the public are clear. And I believe we've reached a stage where most councillors here realise this is a flawed and bad scheme. I think one point I'd just like to comment on the scheme is just looking at it from an engineering point of view. I think it's a very dangerous scheme. The White Sands, the clues in the title, is very porous, and the worst damage is from the pressure below. So now, if we take the road, for example, the road is covered during times of flooding. It'll be uncovered, and yet the head of water in the Nith will be that much higher. The pressure underneath the road will be very, very great. And at the moment, we all have to face enough questions from our constituents about potholes without having to deal with pothills that will be caused by the upward pressure there. I think most of us here know that it's a bad and flawed scheme. I know that most of us are usually under political pressure to vote the party line, but perhaps just once we could listen to our consciences and the people that have spoken, really, and just end this matter today and look for more simple solutions to what is really quite a simple problem. Doesn't need this very exotic and expensive and, in my opinion, very risky project. Thank you.
Mr. MacLeod, could you answer the concern about the pothills?
Thank you, Leader. It is a fair point in respect of water pressure build-up. One of the things that you will see within the committee report and in previous reports is that the drainage systems that drain to the river have the potential to back up because the river levels are raised and there's no longer flooding across the sands that would mask that flooding. Part of the scheme involves the installation of pump stations within the White Sands area that would keep the water levels within the sewer network at a non-surcharging level, a non-flooding level to properties. The passage of water through the ground from the river through the walls and under the roadway is part of the design process and considered in seepage analysis. Probably not the place to go into too much technical details, but the ground conditions have been surveyed through site investigation work to determine what the likelihood is of potential seepage through, and that is addressed within the design process to prevent such concerns as Councillor James has raised.
Thank you, Mr. MacLeod. We now have a motion on the table proposed by Councillor Driver and seconded by Councillor Nicholson. Do we have any amendment? Councillor Charter. Sorry, Councillor.
No, that's fine, Leader. Thanks very much for the opportunity again. I'll probably take my 3 minutes here just to try and put it in context. We're saying that we're absolutely entitled to that.
Councillor Carruthers, I'm asking for an amendment. I'm not actually asking for a speech.
I think, we look at standing orders, Leader, I think we're entitled to 3 minutes when we've got to propose an amendment. And absolutely. I think, well, maybe take advice in regards. I think we're entitled to 3 minutes.
I'm advised that you can introduce your amendment. What's the time allowed for that, do you?
3 minutes.
It is 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Thank you, Leader. I'll take my 3 minutes. And this, I won't take 3 minutes, so I'll put it into a wee bit of context. I mean, John Swinney came here just over 2 years ago. I think at the time he was Cabinet Secretary, now he's Deputy First Minister, and said he would not support a flood defence scheme that did not have community consensus, and we do not have that in this particular case. We're talking about the history of this particular scheme. It was then Councillor Roger Grant, 2008-9 it actually kicked off, no, 2012. That was beyond that point in time. That was when it started to go to a different point of evolution, I would say, and take a slightly different direction. And what we spoke about at that point in time was having a holistic view, going up to Mid and Upper Nithsdale, looking at sustainable drainage schemes, points up there we could actually capture and store water, and more plant and so on and so forth, but involving landowners, farmers, so on and so forth, so therefore it would reduce the level of flooding down in the White Sands itself, and something in very much small scale, maybe raising of the wall to a small degree down here. That evolved, changed, and then we've had so many objections now raised. I think we have to really, really take a look at ourselves. Only winners here, I think, at the end of the day, taking into consideration what we've just been told about a public local inquiry are the lawyers, I would say. That's nobody else is getting anything out of this. It's the legal teams that has got a benefit for this. I think that's where it starts and stops. And I would imagine certainly by the Conservative group and whoever else supports it, we are, in real terms, we will become objectors to this scheme, and we will get a chance to hear the voices at the public local inquiry as well, if Scottish Government decide to actually have that, or a hearing, whatever kind of process that they decide to have. But I think in short term, if you look at recommendation 2.3, the very first word is note, and I would suggest that we change that to agree. So it's agree that having received and considered the objections, and at that point, we reject the scheme. And I would see that as an amendment.
Amendment is to reject the scheme. Is there a second for that amendment? Right.
Point of clarity, Leader.
Councillor Dryborough did not really get the opportunity to speak to his motion, so I will invite him to speak to his motion now.
Thank you very much, Leader. This is quite simple for me. This is a process issue rather than what's been discussed so far. There's a lot of misinformation during this whole process. There is huge support for this scheme, actually, when you look at the public displays that we actually had with the 3D images and all that. There was more support for this scheme than anything else. And I'm actually quite surprised that councillors are trying to exclude the public from actually giving their opportunity to say whether they support or object to this. Now, that's what the opposition have actually said in this chamber. They are now trying to exclude the public from actually having their say on the whole thing. There's 340 objectors. I don't know how many people are in Dumfries, but it's certainly in the 40,000 region. So 340 out of 40,000 didn't say to me there is a huge, objection against this project. I think, as I've said before, Chair, it's a process issue, and we need to go with the recommendations to actually bring it to a head, and so move.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. Can we now proceed to the vote?
Leader, can I get some clarity, please? Just before we cast our vote, is the amendment to do absolutely nothing in the White Sands?
I think it's to reject. Councillor Ferguson, we have three options. One's to confirm the decision without modification, one's to confirm the decision with modification, the other is to reject. So I presume Councillor Carruthers' proposal is that we reject the motion, which would...
Thanks, Leader. That's the clarity I'm looking for. Is the amendment to reject the scheme entirely? Because that's what it is. It can either be one or the other.
I think it is.
I think you outlined it perfectly there. It's to reject the scheme. That's it.
Can we now then proceed to the vote?
Okay, so we're clear that the motion is as proposed by Councillor Dryborough and the amendment by Councillor Carruthers. Leader?
Motion.
Deputy Leader?
Motion.
Councillor Bell?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Brodie?
Amendment.
Councillor Doogie Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor John Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor Carruthers?
Amendment.
Councillor Charteris?
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster?
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough?
Motion.
Councillor Fairbairn?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Motion.
Councillor Gilroy?
Amendment.
Councillor Giusti?
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman?
Motion.
Councillor Howie?
Motion.
Councillor Hislop? Councillor Ingalls?
Amendment.
Councillor James?
Amendment.
Councillor Johnston?
Amendment.
Councillor Lever?
Motion.
Councillor Little?
Motion.
Councillor McGregor? Councillor Maitland?
Motion.
Councillor Marshall?
Motion.
Councillor Martin?
Motion.
Councillor McClelland?
Motion.
Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McKee?
Motion.
Councillor Nicholl?
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson?
Motion.
Councillor Ronnie?
Amendment.
Councillor Sloan?
Motion.
Councillor Stitt?
Motion.
Councillor Surtees?
Motion.
Councillor Tate?
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson?
Motion.
Councillor Wilson?
Motion.
Councillor Wood?
Motion.
Councillor Young?
Motion.
The motion is carried by 25 votes to 16.
Thank you, members, and that closes this meeting of the Council.